There is a point where your life begins to reflect not what you say you want, but what you have been willing to act on. And that distinction becomes impossible to ignore once you are aware of it. I have reached that point more than once, but there is a difference between recognizing a pattern and being in a position where you can no longer continue it without feeling the full weight of your own decisions. This is one of those times. There was a decision I delayed, even though I already understood what needed to be done. It was not unclear, and it was not something that required more information. The delay had nothing to do with confusion. It had everything to do with what acting on that decision would require from me. I understood that once I moved, something in my life would change in a way that could not be reversed. And I was not prepared to fully accept that at the time. So I continued forward, as if the decision could wait. From the outside, nothing appeared out of place. I handled what needed to be handled, stayed engaged in my responsibilities, and maintained a level of normalcy that would not draw any attention. There was no obvious disruption, but internally, there was a consistent awareness that I was postponing something that mattered. That awareness did not come and go. It remained present in a way that was steady, not urgent, but persistent enough that I could not fully disengage from it. At first, the delay felt reasonable. I felt like I was giving myself space to be sure, allowing time for things to settle, making a measured decision instead of a reactive one. Over time, that explanation stopped holding, because what I knew did not change. And when what you know remains the same, the delay is no longer about understanding. It becomes about willingness. That is where the shift begins, not in the decision itself, but in the recognition that continuing to delay it is an active choice. That realization is not comfortable. It removes the idea that you are waiting for the right moment. It shows you that the moment has already arrived and you are choosing not to step into it. And that choice has consequences, even when they are not immediately visible. The consequences is not always external. It is internal. It shows up in how you carry your day. It shows up in your focus, in your energy, in your ability to move cleanly from one decision to the next. There is a level of hesitation that begins to affect areas of your life that are not directly connected to the original decision. You begin to feel the weight of something unresolved, not because it is complicated, but because it has been postponed beyond the point where postponement feels natural or even neutral. I reached a point where the delay itself became more exhausting than the decision. That is what brought everything forward. Not pressure from outside circumstances, but the recognition that I was using energy to maintain distance from something I already understood. At the same time, another reality was present. My financial situation required attention. That is not something that can be approached in theory. It is direct. It requires decisions that have immediate impact. It requires structure, consistency, and the willingness to engage with reality without avoiding it. There is no space to speak about alignment in a general way when you are also aware that your resources are limited and time is moving forward. That creates a different level of tension. Not because one cancels the other, but because both demand a response. I could not separate them. I could not say that I would focus on clarity and deal with reality later. And I could not say that I would only focus on survival and ignore what I already knew internally. Both were present, and both required me to respond. That is where I began to understand something that I had not fully accepted before. There's no division between what you feel is true and how you live. Any separation between the two is something you maintain, and maintaining that separation requires effort. Once you stop maintaining that separation, your life begins to reorganize around what is actually aligned. That reorganization is not immediate, and it's not always comfortable. It requires you to make decisions without having complete certainty about the outcome. It requires you to act while still feeling the weight of responsibility. It requires you to trust what you know without needing it to be confirmed by external conditions first. That is where I found myself, not in a place where everything was resolved, but in a place where I could no longer ignore what I knew or continue dividing my awareness from my actions. I had to decide whether I was going to continue delaying what I knew or begin acting on it, even if the path forward was not fully defined. That is a different kind of decision, because it's not based on fear and it's not based on comfort. It is based on truth. And truth does not remove the reality of being human. It changes how you face it. It does not remove the need to generate income, to make practical decisions, or to manage the responsibility of daily life. What it does is change how you engage with those responsibilities. You are no longer reacting to them from a place of avoidance or delay. You are engaging with them from a place of knowing that does not make the process easier, but it makes it direct. And direct movement creates a different outcome than hesitation. I began to see that the presence I had always felt was not something separate from my life. That would remove difficulty or provide answers in a way that eliminated responsibility. It was something that had been consistent the entire time. It did not force me to act. It did not prevent me from delaying. It remained steady. Regardless of how I chose to respond, I began to understand that what I had been calling presence was God, quiet, consistent, and never forcing me, but always there. That changed how I understood it. I was not trying to find guidance. I was learning how to stop overriding it. And once that became clear, the focus shifted. Not towards waiting for a sign, not towards hoping that something outside of me would change, but towards taking responsibility for how I move in the world, knowing that what I needed was already present. That is where everything begins to stabilize. Not because the external conditions are resolved, but because your internal position is no longer divided. Movement changes. What has been avoided is no longer avoided. What is known is no longer set aside. And where action is required, it is taken. And over time, that changes the structure of your life, not through one decision, but through consistent alignment. Life begins to reflect what is actually being lived, not what is understood. That is the difference. And once you see it, you cannot return to the previous way of moving without feeling the weight of that choice. There is something already clear in your life. Not everything, just one thing. And if you are honest, you already know what it is. The question is not whether you understand it. The question is, are you willing to act on it? That is not pressure. That is truth. And truth, when it is acted on, becomes direction. That is how you move forward without separating what you feel from how you live. Not perfectly, but consistently enough that your life begins to match what you have known all along. You are becoming. Every time you stop delaying what you already know. Not all at once. Just in the moment you choose to move. This is Butterfly, the becoming. Speak, heal, become.